Pre-code Hollywood really was an untamed period, especially when it came to unsettling cinema. With almost no meaningful censorship in place, filmmakers pushed stories into dark and extreme territory, producing movies so controversial that many are still difficult to show today, even in 2025. If you think modern horror challenges audiences, wait until you see what directors were able to put on screen nearly 100 years ago. So get comfortable, lower the lights, and prepare yourself as we count down 15 of the most disturbing films made during the pre-code era. We begin with Freaks, directed by Todd Browning. The film remains deeply unsettling not only because of its story, but because of how powerfully it still affects viewers. Drawing on his own experiences with circus life, Browning took a risk no other filmmaker of the time dared to take by casting real sideshow performers with physical disabilities as the central characters. The story focuses on Cleopatra, a beautiful trapeze artist who plots with her lover to marry and then kill a wealthy little person named Hans in order to steal his money. When the other performers discover the scheme, they unite to carry out a horrifying act of revenge. The closing section of the film is legendary. Cleopatra's ultimate fate is mostly suggested rather than directly shown, but what the audience does see is shocking. She is transformed into a shrieking, mutilated human duck, with her arms and legs removed. Shot in driving rain and near darkness, the revenge sequence feels chaotic, savage, and frightening. Viewers in 1932 were so disturbed that the studio removed more than 30 minutes from the original cut, footage that has since disappeared. One woman at a preview screening even claimed the film caused her to miscarry, and the studio was taken to court. The movie was later banned in the United Kingdom for 3 decades, and its commercial failure effectively destroyed Browning's career in Hollywood. Today, however, the film is regarded as a cult classic, praised for the compassion it shows toward its so-called monstrous characters and for its brutal honesty about what society labels as abnormal. The true horror is not found in the performers themselves, but in what ordinary people are willing to do for money. This is pre-code cinema at its boldest. Next is Island of Lost Souls, Paramount's controversial version of The Island of Dr. Moreau by H.G. Wells. The film was directed by Earl C. Kenton and features a chilling performance by Charles Laughton. It follows a shipwreck survivor who is stranded on a remote island controlled by the unhinged Dr. Moreau. Obsessed with playing God, Moreau performs horrific experiments, turning animals into human-like beings through brutal surgical procedures. Even when the film merely suggests these acts of vivisection, audiences are left deeply uncomfortable. The island is steeped in dread, populated by pitiful and tortured beast men, who fear the dreaded House of Pain. A disturbing sexual undertone runs through the story as well, especially when Moreau attempts to pair his human-animal creation, Lota the Panther Woman, with the film's hero. Censored in many countries and heavily edited elsewhere, the film still remains powerful. Its oppressive sets, grotesque makeup, and Laughton's cruelly playful performance make it a landmark of early horror, exploring cruelty, blasphemy, and the limits of humanity in a way that is as compelling as it is nightmarish. The third entry is Murders in the Zoo, a Paramount release starring the memorably sinister Lionel Atwill. Often cited as one of the most vicious horrors of the pre-code period, the film wastes no time establishing its brutality. Atwill plays a wealthy zoologist driven mad by jealousy, who punishes his wife's lover by sewing the man's mouth shut with needle and thread, an extraordinarily graphic moment for the early 1930s. From there, the killings continue as he uses the animals in his private zoo, lions, snakes, and alligators, to murder anyone who stands in his way. Even his own wife becomes a potential victim, and the tension escalates as the death toll grows. What makes the film so disturbing is not only its violence, but the calm, methodical cruelty with which Atwill's character carries it out. There is no supernatural force at work, only deliberate human savagery hidden beneath a respectable exterior. The film caused outrage, and some cinemas either censored or refused to show it altogether. It remains a stark reminder that the most terrifying monsters often look completely human. Following that is The Black Cat, one of the bleakest and most visually striking horror productions released by Universal just before the strict enforcement of the production code. The film stars Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi in exceptionally dark roles. The story concerns a newly married couple who become trapped inside the modernist mansion of a satanic architect after a bus accident, while Lugosi portrays a physician obsessed with revenge. The movie openly violates multiple taboos. Karloff's character preserves the bodies of women in glass display cases, takes part in occult ceremonies, and is ultimately flayed alive by Lugosi in a scene that is largely implied but still shocking. A relentless feeling of despair hangs over the film, reinforced by expressionist design, harsh music, and themes of war trauma, blasphemy, and sadism. Although censors demanded changes, the released version still caused controversy. The film demonstrates how pre-code horror could be both beautiful and deeply disturbing, blending psychological suffering with explicit brutality. Another notorious title is The Most Dangerous Game, directed by Ernest B. Skudsack and Irving Pichel. Its premise is so extreme that countless later films have copied or parodied it. A famous big game hunter grows bored with animals and decides that the only worthy prey is human beings. He lures shipwreck survivors to his private island, releases them into the jungle, and hunts them for sport. The film confronts the horror of this idea head-on, showing human heads displayed as trophies, relentless chases through the forest, and a constant atmosphere of fear. For audiences of the time, the concept of killing people purely for pleasure was deeply shocking. Even now, the film remains intense, proving that the deadly game genre was perfected long before modern cinema. Then comes Frankenstein, directed by James Whale and loosely based on the novel by Mary Shelley. Although it has since become a cultural icon, it is easy to forget how unsettling the film originally was. The story follows a scientist who assembles a living being from stolen corpses and then abandons his creation. One of the film's most notorious scenes, removed from many versions for years, shows the creature accidentally drowning a young girl after believing she would float like the flowers they had been throwing into a lake. The suggestion of a child's death caused by the monster was almost unheard of in early sound cinema. The film openly explores sacrilegious ideas about creating life, defying natural limits, and the consequences of human arrogance. Karloff's portrayal of the creature is both frightening and deeply sympathetic, and the makeup design was terrifying for its era. Even today, the monster's isolation and violence leave a lasting impression, making the film one of the most emotionally powerful works of pre-code horror. The list then turns to The Mask of Fu Manchu, an MGM production once again starring Karloff, this time as the infamous villain. The film is notorious for its sadism, overt racism, and lurid scenes of torture. It presents a globe-spanning adventure in which archaeologists and criminal masterminds race to uncover the tomb of Genghis Khan. Fu Manchu, however, is far from a typical cinematic mad scientist. He is a cruel and theatrical torturer who delights in inventing elaborate punishments. In one scene, he prepares to whip a prisoner while mocking Christian martyrdom, and in another he threatens his enemies with impalement. His equally vicious daughter, played by Myrna Loy, adds further disturbing energy to the story. Modern viewers are often shocked by the film's stereotypes, but even contemporary censors objected to its extreme violence and sexualized menace. Although heavily edited in many countries, its gleefully cruel villain still dominates the film, making it a troubling but revealing example of how far pre-code cinema was willing to go. Finally, there is The Mummy, directed by Karl Freund and starring Karloff as Imhotep. While it is often remembered simply as a classic monster film, it was genuinely disturbing for audiences of its time. The story centers on the resurrection of an ancient Egyptian priest who had been buried alive for pursuing forbidden love. Karloff's performance presents Imhotep as both sorrowful and terrifying, and his obsessive search for the reincarnation of his lost lover is filled with longing as well as menace. One of the film's most haunting sequences shows the priest's execution, with servants slaughtered to protect the royal tomb and Imhotep sealed inside his wrappings while still alive. The imagery of his struggle as he is entombed remains one of the most unsettling moments of early horror, and the makeup effects, which required hours of preparation, helped create an unforgettable screen monster. From the eerie method used to transform Karloff's character into a living corpse to the heavy mood of doom and ancient curses, early horror cinema proved just how powerful it could be, especially at a time when audiences were still adjusting to sound films and the simple image of a bandaged body rising from the dead could cause genuine nightmares. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde remains one of the most fearless explorations of human darkness ever put on screen, and Ruben Mamoulian's adaptation stands among the most unsettling versions of the story, with Frederick March delivering an Oscar-winning dual performance that sharply contrasts the polite doctor with his brutal and animalistic alter ego. The film distinguished itself through its shockingly intense tone, innovative makeup and camera techniques that visually twist the hero's body into something monstrous, and through violence that feels disturbingly intimate, particularly in Hyde's cruel and sexually charged abuse of Ivy, a defenseless barmaid, turning the story into a harsh portrait of repression, addiction and the savage impulses buried beneath respectability, a version so extreme for its era that later releases removed or softened many scenes. Yet even in shortened form it remains a brutal reflection on human nature. That same willingness to disturb audiences continued with Mystery of the Wax Museum, released before House of Wax, and remembered for its early two-color Technicolor photography that makes its grotesque imagery even more unsettling, following a scarred sculptor who kills people in order to replace ruined exhibits with real bodies sealed in wax, where the true impact comes not from the cast but from the haunting sets, lifelike faces, shadowy passageways, and the terror of being preserved alive. All staged with shocking directness by Michael Curtiz, who emphasizes blood, knives and vividly colored wax to create a nightmarish blend of gothic style and graphic spectacle. Psychological terror took center stage again in The Invisible Man, another pre-code triumph by James Whale, adapted from the novel by H.G. Wells and featuring Claude Rains as a scientist whose discovery of invisibility leads not to heroism but to cruelty, mass destruction and gleeful murder, presenting horror not through monsters but through a man freed from accountability, taunting victims while causing train disasters, robberies and countless deaths, and making the unsettling argument that technology itself is not the real threat, human ambition is. A different kind of dread fills The Old Dark House, also directed by Whale, where stranded travelers find shelter in a storm-beaten mansion occupied by an unstable and threatening family, and where suggestions of madness, violent authority figures and even cannibalism combine with distorted humor, striking lighting and grotesque personalities to create a suffocating atmosphere that eventually earned the film cult status and shaped the blueprint for later haunted house stories. Existential horror defined White Zombie, often cited as cinema's first true zombie feature, starring Bela Lugosi as a ruthless plantation owner who uses voodoo to enslave human beings, stripping them of identity and free will and forcing them into endless labor, turning the undead into a chilling metaphor for control, exploitation and dehumanization against a backdrop of hypnotic rhythms, empty stares and shadow-filled landscapes. Lesser known but equally daring, Peeping Tom pushed pre-code boundaries by centering on a disturbed voyeur whose obsessive need to watch others spirals into dangerous and violent behavior, refusing to glamorize the predator and instead forcing audiences to confront his compulsions and warped perspective, even though incomplete surviving prints have left the film partially lost. The era's bleak view of morality also surfaced in The Beast of the City, a grim gangster drama starring Walter Houston as a police captain who abandons the rule of law to fight crime, culminating in a relentless and bloody shootout that wipes out most of the main cast and replaces comforting justice with cynicism, corruption and despair, a tone that provoked outrage from censors and politicians. Together, these titles represent some of the most disturbing works produced during Hollywood's pre-code period. Films that dared to confront cruelty, obsession, repression and moral collapse head-on, leaving behind a legacy that still challenges viewers to face the darkest corners of the human mind and ask which of these unsettling classics they have already seen, and which ones they are now ready to add to their watch lists.